All right, cheers and salutations. Welcome, one and all, to Americans Learn. My name is Kit. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and hit that ring bell notification. That way, all of you beautiful people are made aware when we upload new content upon our YouTube channel. And today, we actually have ourselves a special request. So let me go ahead and pull up this name up properly, so that way I could say their name properly. But this comes from one of our loyal subscribers. This is called The Turkish Century by Kraut. And this one was suggested by Melkor. So, folks, we here at Americans Learn, there you go. Americans Learn, sorry for that stutter. I encourage all of you to please support the original content creator. It's the one thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and I expect all of you to do it. So without further ado, we're going to break this 1 hour and 46-minute video apart into 3 different segments. So I'll be playing the first 30 minutes as part 1. So without further ado, since I'm in charge of the ones and twos, let's get ready to play this video in a 3, a 2, and an uno.
What ties a people to their land? What makes land yours? How can land even be yours? The idea of the nation-state is barely 200 years old, and before that idea, the notion of land as a collective property of a cultural or national construct didn't exist. The land was owned by kings, and you lived on their land by their grace. The peoples who worked the lands had no rights over these lands, but were instead tolerated by kings, who themselves claimed to be tolerated by gods. The modern nation-state had to forge identities to justify their existence as sovereigns over said land.
Hail Rome. Never forget Rome.
There are many means and ways to forge such justifications. Our most modern one is derived from adherence to common values or through an integration through language. Because of that, the academic histories of lands are mostly separated into 2 parts: the story of the land itself and the story of those who live in it now. And this place here is a great example of that separation. The region is now mostly known for the name given to it by its modern-day nation-state, Turkey. The geographical terms for it are Anatolia or Asia Minor, being Greek for East or Latin for Little Asia.
Or what was once Eastern Rome. How could you change the name of Constantinople to Istanbul? Why? Why change a good name?
Asia. And the story of Anatolia is a story separated into a part before those currently inhabiting the region and the story of those who inhabit it now. But also the stories of those that came before those that came before those that inhabit it now, and those that came before them and those that came before those. Throughout the millennia, many came to claim these lands, mainly claiming it though through one thing, a right to land through conquest, as these lands are extremely valuable and probably one of the most sought after and valuable pieces of real estate in the Mediterranean. Surrounded by mountain ranges on all sides, the central Anatolian plains with its rivers and the downpours from the Mediterranean spill out into vast fertile plains that were ideal for early agricultural-based settlers, such as the Kultep civilization, around 10,000 years ago. The settlers of this region,
also known perhaps the time when the God Emperor of mankind was born. What?
Also discovered another enormous advantage of the region: the vast natural resources, specifically important for the first metal age that they would help kickstart, namely the copper ore in the Pontic Mountains. The oldest known copper relics, which are around 10,000 years old, have been found in this region of Anatolia. Through digging up and dating copper relics, we know that this region of the world is the epicenter from which the Copper Age began. Being that copper was the most modern technology of the time, it turned the region into a center for trade and connected its civilization to the southern civilizations of the Halaf culture based in modern-day northern Syria. This trade was made easy through yet another benefit of the Anatolian geography. Anatolia is the origin of the 2 most important rivers in the Middle East, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Copper could be shipped downstream and traded for mirrors, pottery and grain that the succeeding Mesopotamian civilizations citizens had to sell. Cometh the Bronze Age, cometh a new civilization, the Hittites, and the region developed into one of the most prosperous of the ancient world. If the Hittites or Indo-European peoples came to Anatolia as migrants or conquerors is not known. We only know that they came with the Bronze Age and stayed. Bronze is made 9 parts copper and 1 part of tin, which makes tin a resource in need. Again, this region is the epicenter of the Bronze Age, yet another metal age, but we do not know where the tin came from. There are large tin deposits in Britain, northern France, Portugal, Spain, Malaysia and Nigeria, which for their part explain the burgeoning Bronze Age civilizations in these places wants to know how reach them. But not so much in Anatolia. The origin of the tin used to make bronze in Anatolia is still somewhat of a mystery. Tin, due to its chemical composition, can form into tinstone or cassiterite, which, similar to gold, can form at riverbanks in what are called placers that can be scooped and collected. Our safest bet.
I never knew this before. Hey, who says you can't learn anything new here at Americans Learn, right? Can't wait till we get to Byzantium.
Is that this is how the tin was acquired in the river landscapes of Mesopotamia and Anatolia. The bronze made out of that tin and copper brought wealth, but also the Bronze Age collapse, during which the Hittite Empire fell apart into small bickering states to eventually be conquered by the Assyrian Empire. Even though often described as an Assyrian colony, it is far more likely that Anatolia was one of the more important and significant regions of the Assyrian Empire, and not just a foreign place conquered and plundered. A 3,000-year-old ship found off the coast of Uluburn, loaded with dozens of tons of copper, tin, bronze, gold, as well as ivory, point to the significance of Anatolia as an integral part of the Assyrian Empire, as do the various Assyrian artifacts found in Anatolia. Yet as the Hittite Empire declined, someone else also took up shop on the other side of Anatolia. Lydia appeared around 3,000 years ago and took advantage of yet another great geographic benefit of Anatolia, its vast coastline protected by mountains, ideal to go out and trade through the Mediterranean, but with the added benefit of the mountains providing protection from any potential invasion by sea. Lydia managed to fight off nomadic raiders such as the Scythians and Cimmerians, and access to
All right, keep on kicking ass.
the Mediterranean brought Lydia under early Greek influence and trade with Egypt, which in return allowed it to prosper. Meanwhile, on the other side of Anatolia, the Assyrians collapsed into bickering states at civil war that neglected many provinces of their once great empire, which allowed the nomadic Scythians and Cimmerians to raid its Anatolian lands, and eventually for the Achaemenids to roll in and take it all over. And here we reach a moment where history mixes somewhat with legend and myth. The last king of Lydia, Croesus, visited the oracle of Delphi asking if he should go to war with the Achaemenids, to which the oracle replied, "If you go to war, a great kingdom shall be destroyed." So Croesus went to war with the Achaemenids, and consequently the kingdom of Lydia was destroyed as the Achaemenids conquered it. However, as much as the Achaemenids must have enjoyed their power over Anatolia, they didn't make it their new home, but a satrapy, where local Greek colonists and city-states increasingly resented their Persian overlords, which in return was a perfect justification for the Macedonians to invade the place and
The Macedonian nuts.
kick the Achaemenids out again. This began a long period of Hellenic dominance in Anatolia, however not through a united Greek ruler, but several states, kingdoms and entities, such as the Seleucids, Pontus and Pergamon, who warred and bickered over land and dominance over the landmass. It saw the arrival of the Bithynians in the Bosporan Straits, a Thracian people from modern-day Bulgaria who Hellenized and founded a city and kingdom at a strategically important position. The arrival of the Galatians,
Yeah, probably nothing important. I heard it called Byzantium. Nothing too important.
who were a Celtic tribe from modern-day Hungary who migrated into Greece, sacked several cities, and then migrated into Anatolia to settle there. There, they would be neighbors to the Cappadocians, an Iranian kingdom in central Anatolia. Combined with an Armenian expansion westward, this shaped Anatolia's cultural makeup for centuries to come as a diverse place of many different cultures, languages, and peoples. And this multitude of cultures, combined with the strategic importance of the landmass, made especially the coastal regions rich and powerful. Greek kingdoms controlled trade from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. Galatian mercenaries served in Egyptian armies, and the Armenian kingdom kept growing. Then came the Romans, who didn't drive any.
Yes! Ancient Rome. Take it away, buddies.
away, but simply made everyone Roman. Under
There we
the
go.
Romans, the wealth of the region didn't decline, but increase. More importantly, as Anatolia could be used as a base of power from which, through rivers and roads, power could be exercised over the Levant, Mesopotamia, and by that extent Egypt, the importance of the province that the Romans named Asia Minor kept growing and growing. In particular, the importance of its biggest city, Bithynia. Financial, political, and military power gradually shifted within the Roman Empire eastwards to Anatolia and the Bosporus Straits.
To like a little known city called Byzantium.
Culturally, this changed the makeup of the Roman Empire in the east. It became more Greek, as the people in the cities were predominantly Greek. It is where the Romans started adopting Christianity, with a distinctive Greek touch to it. After the death of Rome's first Christian empire, the city which he had helped expand as the new capital was named after him.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, give it up for the city, the greatest city ever, Constantinople. And that's the only name we call it. Any other name is insulting. We call it Constantinople.
Him and subsequent emperors divided the empire into two, of which the Eastern Empire would be the only one to remain. As such, it endured further centuries from its capital at the Bosporus, with its heartland in Anatolia, even as it lost much of its empire, first to the Sassanids and then to the First Caliphates. Someone, however, who is not to be seen in this, the first years of history of this mass of land, are the people who this video is about. They spent those years elsewhere, and at around 1200 they were about to make their great entry into this story.
And who are they?
"10,000 years ago, our ancestors were all nomads. For the first several 10,000 years of our species' existence, man and woman were wanderers. The discovery of fire, the first to make tool flint, and those who painted the vast, beautiful cave paintings in places such as Chauvet in France, were people constantly on the move. And move they had to. The protein they relied on for their diet was meat, which is a more concentrated protein than plant food. Eating meat also cuts down the time spent eating by 2/3. But meat is harder to acquire, especially for a slow creature like a human being having to hunt creatures that are adapted to fleeing far faster predators than men. To be able to hunt such prey, it requires specialization and collective effort. And it also requires movement, because hunting cannot sustain a growing population at one spot over time. The extent to which a patch of land can sustain a hunting population is limited by the game being hunted, its cyclical patterns of migration, and that leaves hunters with the very stark choice of either moving with the game or starvation. Early humans didn't become nomads by choice, but because they had no other choice. At around 10,000 BC, something happened that disrupted the nomadic lives of many early humans. The Ice Age ended. And with the change in climate and landscape that reshaped the world's geography, river valleys and vast fertile plains capable of sustaining agriculture formed that invited these early people in to settle. However, in free regions of the world, geography still lent itself to the life of the nomad. The plains of North America, the savannas of Africa, and the vast steppes of Asia. As people settled in the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, the Indus River Valley, and the Yellow River Valley, the peoples of the steppe had no place to settle. The agricultural revolution of 10,000 BC also brought a new addition that affected the lives of nomads as well, the domestication of animals. Reindeer.
That was the game changer for humanity. As soon as we got those animals in line, it was game over for the ecosystem. That's right. Take that, saber-toothed tiger and cave bears and what else was it? Dire wolves and cave lions. Yeah, take that. Humanity first.
Goats and sheep domesticated changed the nomad life from hunter-gatherers to herders. Through this, the nomads took upon themselves the responsibility of nature. Providing food for the herded animals required the nomads to continue traveling in search of pastures to graze. A nomad's life is a harsh and unforgiving life. Life is an endless ritual revolving around the animals, the horses, the sheep, the dogs, the goats, take center stage in life and community. A tribe's value and strength are measured by its animals. Constant moving and dedication to survival leave little room for specialization, as all specialization is dedicated to the herd and the tribe. Survival requires a simple life as a nomad. Within settled civilizations, the surplus in food allowed for a surplus in labor pool who could specialize in masonry, metalwork, writing, governance, and more. However, specializations within settled communities have disadvantages compared to nomadic civilizations. A farmer is specialized to be a farmer. A mason is specialized to be a mason, neither are warriors. In comparison, a nomad will always be a herder, a hunter, and a warrior at the same time. Civilization also comes with civilization diseases, which most nomads avoid, resulting in...
Let's face it, locusts, plague, disease, rot, a very serious thing. By the way, folks, look, it's one thing to be growing your own food, and everyone should learn how to do it. I myself have grown my own food and have done it. Yes, even though I live in the city of Chicago, I've grown strawberries and green beans, green beans, strawberries, carrots, potatoes, and yes, my personal favorite, tomatoes. And they've always been my favorite plant to grow. And I recently I don't have too much time to focus on a lot of what I would grow way back in the day when I had more free time. But I've got 5 good tomato plants that are growing, and I'm looking forward to eating some good bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches, or using those tomatoes for BLTs.
And longer average life expectancy for a nomadic culture. And in that position, a nomad can also acquire technologies of settled peoples by simply taking them or trading them. One of the largest geographic landscapes in the world are the Eurasian steppes. They stretch out from the Balkans to the Pacific coast over a total of over 4,000 miles in length and up to 1,000 miles wide. This vast landscape is almost in its entirety flat, grassy plains stretching out endlessly into the horizon, dotted with a few deserts and hills. Only a few mountains and lakes pierce through this endless landscape. There are no rivers to settle around, no large fertile fields to irrigate, no mountains to build borders around, no boulders to make walls with, and no forests to log and build with. So the people who inhabited these lands remained nomadic as most others settled. And who these people were is somewhat hard to define. People are different from animals in that we don't just leave behind what we were when we die, but also what we made. And with nomads, there is not much being left behind. No buildings, walls, or castles. To nomadic peoples, everything is always used, nothing is wasted, and therefore almost nothing is left behind. The best an archaeologist can hope for are burial mounds, and what we find in them may contradict stereotypes that you may have of the supposedly scruffy poor nomad.
Whoa! Oh, that dude is dressed in style. Oh, I love this guy already. I don't know who he is, but man, he must have been mad pimpish.
The armor of the Golden Warrior can be seen in the Kazakhstan National Museum and was presumably worn by a Scythian warrior 2,400 years ago. From Kazakhstan to Ukraine to Russia to Mongolia, what we find proves considerable wealth and fortunes belonged to the tribes inhabiting these lands. But we also find arrowheads and helmets made of bronze and other materials. Metalwork, however, is a specialization that nomads don't have access to, which shows to us that they gained such either through trade, tribute, or force. Beyond the physical evidence found in burial mounds, it is possible to draw a map with borders detailing which nomadic tribe lived where in which parcel of these vast lands. However, for people constantly on the move, owning land makes no sense. The idea of a border also makes no sense. The only border a nomad knows is an ocean a horse can't ride, a jungle a horse can't cross, a desert a horse won't survive in, and a mountain a horse can't jump over. And because of this, when speaking of nomads, the idea of a people or nation in our sense doesn't make sense. Nomads see themselves more in terms of families and clans, and in such structures, interactions between tribes of differing cultures are also different. A conquered people are not subjugated, enslaved, or slaughtered, but simply made part of the tribe and the extended family. Marriages across cultures are more common and widespread than in settled civilizations. You can have a geographic estimate of where which tribe and people were active, but those estimates are often based on accounts by victims of raids. Through that we can place the Scythians, for example, in the land stretching from Ukraine through the Caucasus to northern Iran, as these tribes raided and plundered Greeks, Thracians and Iranians, who then wrote about them. But these are not to be understood as lands in the modern sense with borders, but more as a sphere of influence within which the Scythians were active. For the vast enormous steppes themselves, it is difficult to determine who was where, at what point, for how long. What we do know is that there were many. The Scythians, the Proto-Iranian Scythians, also known as the Sarmatians, the Proto-Slavic tribes, the Finno-Ugric tribes, the Proto-Mongols, and up there in the easternmost fringes of Siberia and northern China, we find where the Proto-Turkic people probably came from.
Dare I hate to say it, the Huns.
And we know of them from this place because some of them still live there, still as nomads and still worshipping the ancient nature gods, and because they raided the Chinese, who then wrote about them. And what the Chinese had to write about these early Proto-Turkic peoples wasn't very flattering. Then again, the ancient Chinese didn't have much nice to say about anyone besides themselves.
Everyone who isn't me is a barbarian. Hey, listen, I see those barbarians build a great wall.
Based around the Altai Mountains in various confederations and tribes, these Proto-Turkic tribes would raid Chinese towns and castles. But we also encounter a problem through these Chinese sources. The exact ethnic makeup of the tribes they encountered is somewhat unclear. The large steppe regions east of the Altai Mountains were not just home to the Proto-Turkic, but also to the Proto-Mongol tribes. It is therefore sometimes unclear if a tribe or confederation of tribes that the Chinese historians describe were Turkic or Mongol, since ancient Chinese historians made no distinction and just called all of them barbarians. One of the first large nomadic confederations of the region was the Xianbei, and since the debate over if they were Mongol, Turkic or a confederation of both is heated and the answer unknown, I won't be trying to answer it here. The Xianbei were overthrown by the Rouran Khaganate, of which it isn't entirely clear if they were Turkic or Mongol, but it is more likely that they were Mongol. To the north of the Rouran
Alright, give it up for the Mongols. Genghis Khan and his fantastic friends.
Khaganate, there was however a tribal confederation which we know was Turkic, the Xiongnu, and it is through them that the peoples of Europe and the Middle East had their first encounters with Turkic peoples when some of them migrated west in late 300, where they were called the Huns. This was
Bastards. Goddamn Huns. They offered nothing to society.
the first large-scale invasion by nomadic people of Europe, and it instantly revealed the weaknesses of the type of warfare that the settled kingdoms practiced. Plate armor, heavy chainmail, tight formations, heavy weapons and slow-moving military tactics were absolutely no match to the swift, fast-moving horse archers in light leather armor. The Huns also introduced the Romans to the recurve bow. This is as simple a technology as a bow bent backward, which increases the tension on the bowstring, allowing the arrows to be shot with more power and speed, which caused the arrows to simply punch through Roman armors, chainmail and shields with close to no effort.
Because they used dark magic there, alright? They used dark magic.
This bow was the result of the nomadic specific specializations required to improve a herd society's life.
Curses upon the Huns.
Hunnic tribes invaded Europe, Iran and northern India and caused the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. However,
disregard that fact.
After defeating their enemies and acquiring vast empires of tributary states, a weakness in the nomad life was exposed. After conquering a settled people, a nomad cannot simply remain a nomad anymore. A settled people cannot simply be integrated into a tribe or family like a different nomadic tribe. And consequently, the nomads are trapped into consistently patrolling a hostile land, worked by a people who increasingly despise their overlords.
That's right. Death to the Huns.
The Hunnic Empire stretched from the North Sea to the Caspian, but after barely half a century, they were driven out by the people they had subjugated.
Yeah!
As the Hunnic Empire collapsed into itself, the 5th century started with a flood of nomadic peoples invading and migrating into settled lands. The Bulgars, Avars, Slavs, Finno-Ugurs, and the Hungarians came from the Eurasian steppe into Europe throughout the next 4 centuries. But unlike the Huns that preceded them, they all settled and transformed from nomadic peoples into settled kingdoms. And during that time, on the other end of the Eurasian continent, an interesting development was happening. The Ruran Khaganate collapsed and was replaced by the Turkic Khaganate, also known as the Gökturks. After defeating the Ruran Khaganate, the Gökturks would defeat the Iranian Hittites and consolidate power over almost the entire Eurasian steppe. From there, they would continuously launch raids against China and Persia, and it is possible that their conquest of the Eurasian steppes is what caused the great migrations of people into Europe as refugees from the Gökturks. However, by 600, their empire had split into two between a West and an East Khanate. The Eastern Khaganate would spend its history almost constantly raiding Tang dynasty China until it fell to the Turkic Uyghur Khaganate, which itself fell apart into various smaller Khaganates. The Western Göktürk Khanate also
Loving the songs, by the way.
fell apart into various smaller Khanates and tribes, and amongst them, one would stand out and do something that no Turkic tribe had done before. The Tatars were Turkic peoples originating in Central Asia, and one of their tribes, during the expansion of the Göktürk Empire and its collapse, settled at the Aral Sea, expanded south into modern-day Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, where they gave up being nomads and converted to Islam. The Seljuks. They became great admirers of their new neighbors, the Samanid Empire of Iran. It was the Samanids who converted the Seljuks to Islam. The Seljuks became increasingly fond of their new Iranian neighbors. They started dressing like their Iranian idols. Seljuk nobility started speaking Persian. They adopted the Persian alphabet, minted Persian coins, built castles in Persian style, copied the Samanids wherever they could, and even formed a military alliance with them. Then the Samanids were overthrown by the Ghaznavids, which the Seljuks disapproved of, especially after the Ghaznavids tried to conquer them. So the Seljuks conquered them right back. And that became a watershed moment. Suddenly, they were the rulers of Persia. They, who had started as nomadic herders a few hundred years before, now were the inheritors and the heirs to the great legacy of Iran and all that came with it. Through this, their culture and the way they saw themselves radically changed, and with that, Turkic culture itself changed dramatically. At the time, the Seljuks were probably in the minority amongst the Turkic peoples, as having given up nomadic life and converted to Islam and becoming a settled people. But over the centuries, their influence through their empire would spread into creating a Turkish cultural sphere that stretched from China to the Crimea. As the Seljuks were sitting in their new Persian home, they boarded someone new, Baghdad, the capital of the once great First Islamic Caliphate.
Hey, there's a city I know all too well. In fact, yours truly lived in Saddam Hussein's basement. That's right. Long time ago, in the year of 2005, my first tour in Iraq, we were stationed in the Green Zone. I lived in Saddam Hussein's basement. Ha! Oh my goodness. Seems like a... Hey, listen, you know when you hear... Do you remember when you were a young kid and you heard your grandparents and your elders say, hey, time flies by? Believe you me, I've learned that lesson.
Center of knowledge and trade in the Middle East, one of the greatest jewels a medieval empire could own, held by the Buyids, who happened to be Shia Muslims. So the Sunni Abbasids gave them the permission to conquer it. This moved the Seljuks into the center of the Islamic world, and with this they boarded yet another prize, the greatest they had seen until then. That last remaining piece of the Roman Empire, the Byzantines. And that prize no longer got out of their heads. Rome, one of the greatest empires of all time, the founders of European civilization, the pinnacle of what an empire could be. The Seljuks changed their imperial seal and battle banners to the double-headed eagle of Rome. They started calling themselves the inheritors and legitimate rulers.
How dare you! Unbiased history... Go ahead, he's got some words for you.
Of the Roman Empire and went to war, because there could in the end only be one Roman Empire. It went well at first. The Byzantines had recently declared the Armenians to be heretics to the Christian faith, so the Armenians didn't put up much of a fight when the Seljuks came to take the Byzantine Caucasian lands. From there on, they marched into Anatolia. They fought off and defeated 2 crusades called to defeat them. They lost Iran to a Persian uprising, but Anatolia continued to be their main prize. They came within miles of the great prize of Constantinople itself, but events that they could have never foreseen, in the very place they themselves had come from 3,000 miles away, prevented their final triumph. As in the steppes of Asia, 600 years of Turkic dominance came to an end. It took the Turkic people 600 years to migrate into Central Asia and expand from Central Asia into Persia and the Middle East and eventually into Anatolia. The Mongols only needed 40 years to conquer it all, as well as China. After defeat to the Mongols, the Seljuks fell apart into bickering little fiefdoms and states who all bowed to the Mongols. But far from this being the end of the story, it is merely the start of the next great chapter.
Who? I call on the question of that. There are no heirs to Rome except for Rome itself.
Over the centuries, from 600 to 1200, the Turkic expansion created a vast Turkic cultural sphere of many a Turkic people. It stretched from Siberia to Anatolia, and as the Mongols emerged from the vast horde lands of the east, their conquest of Asia didn't just result in a mere subjugation of Turkic tribes and kingdoms, but in massive migration of Turkic peoples. From Central Asia to Persia and the Caucasus, many Turkic peoples packed and fled in search of refuge, and they mostly ended up in the lands of the Seljuks, thereby establishing a large Turkish population in Anatolia. The Seljuks themselves fell to the Mongols, and the 1300s were dominated by the Taifas, little petty kingdoms, warlords, and tribes that bickered and fought amongst themselves for control over the others and dominance. But they had a great advantage compared to the others defeated by the Mongols: the Zagros mountain range, stretching from the Caucasus to the Gulf. This vast range of mountains protects whoever rules Iran, but it also locks them into Iran, making it hard to sally forth into the Middle East or Anatolia. And at a certain point it was simply no longer worthwhile to launch large expeditions to ensure the Anatolian Turks stayed in line. The most powerful of them was the Rum Sultanate, the successors to the Seljuk throne. One of the least powerful was a little state whose rulers originally came from Central Asia and had fled west from the Mongols: the Ottomans. While much of the Middle East had been flung into chaos through the Mongol invasion, the Ottomans managed to build a sphere of stability in their realm. This attracted craftsmen, intellectuals, and trade, while also providing the Ottomans with the stability required to go out and hassle others. Those others mainly being the Byzantines. But the Ottomans didn't just go charge into war as the Seljuks had. And of course they went through spats of conquest here and then, but the Ottomans mainly subdued the Byzantines through diplomacy, politics, and patience.
What they used was the dark side of the Force and evil magic.
Married Byzantine princesses, schemed within the politics of the Byzantine royal court, promised the Byzantines support against the Bulgars with
Dovahaddy's got some words for you.
Venetians and Serbs, but used those promises to just take lands previously owned by the Byzantines, then conquered by others, and to not give them back. By the turn of the century, the Ottomans had established a firm grip over the Balkans and western Anatolia, and that gave them an enormous strategic advantage over the other caliphates and the Seljuks and everyone else who had come before them from the Middle East and Iran and attempted to conquer the Mediterranean. Access to the resources of these lands would further Ottoman conquest for more power elsewhere. It gave them a place of some tranquility as the Mongol hordes invaded Anatolia again. But to understand the complete significance, we have to look at maps and ships. Seafaring was extremely dangerous for most of human history and mostly involved coast hopping. You would sail along the coastline, always in sight of said coastline, and at all costs avoid the open ocean as much as you possibly could. The means to navigate the vast open seas were simply not available, and getting lost out of sight of the coast was tantamount to a death sentence. This, of course, cancelled out most of the Atlantic as any means of transportation by sea, but transport by sea was still faster and more efficient than transport by land, so it was still worth the risk heading out and hopping along the coastline. The Mediterranean, however, was different. It was mostly calm, but far more important, it had peninsulas, lots of peninsulas, all over the place. And when you look at these maps, it is also useful to forget the current geopolitical boundaries and borders. 1,000 years ago, the concept of Europe as a uniform entity of some shared culture or values would have made no sense. What, however, would have made sense would have been to categorize the region around the Mediterranean as its own entity, a kind of Mediterranean sphere of culture and influence.
Also known as Rome's waters. Thank you very much.
People in the Levant would have had more interactions with people in Sicily than people in Sicily would have had with people from the North Sea. Add to that the Egyptian breadbasket, and you have a region that many empires came to try and rule for themselves. Especially in these regions, the Adriatic, the Aegean, the Black Sea, and in particular, the Dardanelles. In these waters, it is close to impossible to get lost at sea. Almost like lakes, no matter where you head, you will almost certainly at some point hit land in close vicinity. This means that you didn't need to hop along the coastline as much, and that you could tax, police, and control all traffic.
Kind of makes you wonder how Odysseus got lost then. Hey, Odysseus, how long were you lost at sea for and why? Probably didn't want to come home to his wife.
Going through these segments of ocean. This allowed for specialization in nautical transport and warfare, and consequently it should not surprise you that prior to the 16th century, most European and Middle Eastern empires happened to be those who controlled those straits. This is a great springboard to go out and conquer the rest of the Mediterranean. And what about the Mediterranean? What makes it so special? It is again the fact that ocean travel was limited to coast hopping. To the people of the time, the oceans were vast, deep pits of certain death. Siberia was empty horde lands with close to no means of large-scale transportation. So if you owned the eastern Mediterranean, you controlled all trade between west and east, be it the spices from India or silk from China. All of it had to go through the eastern Mediterranean. And if you controlled that, you could tax it.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
Before the 17th century, the geography of the Eastern Mediterranean was geography that made its owners superpowers. Then there's also the breadbasket, specifically Mesopotamia and Egypt. Both these regions have the benefit of the most fertile lands in the region combined with a mild climate. This consistently produced the regular surplus in grain, which in return could feed vast empires, while most lands elsewhere had to consistently face regular famines due to crop failures and other agricultural disadvantages. Those who owned Egypt could guarantee a regular, not just supply, but a surplus of food for its own population, allowing them to focus their attention elsewhere and expand. As much as we like to think of the Ottomans as a historical entity that represents an Islamic force trying to conquer Europe, the reality of the matter is that the Ottomans mainly pursued rule over the Mediterranean, because most powers before them had done so as well, and because of the enormous geopolitical value of the Mediterranean before the 1700s. And the first step to controlling the Mediterranean was completed by the 1450s.
No! No! Don't show me that! No, not Constantinople. Can't fall. I refuse to see it.
The Ottomans ended the Byzantines and controlled most of the Balkans, Marmara, the Bosporus, and the Aegean coastline. The Ottomans made Constantinople their new capital and
Yes, and don't change the frickin' name. Don't change the name.
transformed the city dramatically. Under the Byzantines, the city had stretched along the southern end of the Golden Horn. Under the Ottomans, over the next 2 centuries, the city expanded into all directions to include the entire Golden Horn and both sides of the Bosporan Straits. The massive city would come to dominate international trade for the next 200 years, and also would be the harbour from which an enormous Ottoman fleet would try to conquer and control the Mediterranean. beginning what we now know as the Era of Transformation. That massive navy helped conquer the Black Sea coastline and Crimea, as well as solidify Ottoman control over Greece. Meanwhile, in the south, Egypt and the Levant had been ruled by the Mamelukes, an incompetent series of squabbling dynasties that were unable to put up much resistance to an Ottoman conquest of their lands.
How dare you show the head of Byzantium?
Which then pushed further to conquer North Africa, Mesopotamia, and Arabia, from where the last of the Abbasid caliphs was dragged to Istanbul to abdicate the title of caliph to the Ottoman Sultan. With that done, they were now the center of the Islamic world. They controlled and taxed all Silk Road trade to Europe, had the largest navy in the Mediterranean, and they had access to the Indian Ocean, which they would also try to control. But there's something important which we might be missing here. People tend to live in a society. We can look at maps and economics as much as we want, but fundamentally an empire or nation-state construct of any sort is always a society, and without a coherent social fabric holding it all together, societies tend to collapse into themselves.
Yes.
So what was this Ottoman society like? And how did the social fabric of this society keep such a large and diverse empire together for 400 years? The reason is because at the time, it was one of the few empires that actually had a social structure that could sustain an empire. It tolerated differences. It is easy to forget that before the 1900s, Anatolia's population was 1/3 non-Muslim. In general, there were times in which this Islamic caliphate had a larger Christian population than the Muslim population. On average, Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire were wealthier than the average Turks, because the Greeks had built a large network of trade over centuries that the Ottomans didn't just take from them, but just taxed. Armenian craftsmen helped build the Ottoman navy and their new expanded capital, Istanbul. And the reason for this is because under the Islamic laws, which were the laws of the empire, all these groups were tolerated. We also have to keep in mind that in that time, group identities barely ever exceeded across the borders and limitations of the village that a person resided in. A concept such as a nationalistic tribal identity built on grounds of language or ethnicity wasn't prevalent. And people to an empire are first and foremost one thing: a resource, probably the most valuable resource there is. And the Ottomans were one of the few empires of the time who understood that and welcomed that resource wherever they could receive it. When Spain expelled its Jews, it was the Ottomans who jumped in to welcome them. And that tolerance that made life in a religious hierarchy possible gave the Ottomans enormous advantages over their contemporaries. Arab caliphates, in comparison, tended to overly stigmatize non-Muslim groups, enforced Arab tribal structures over subjects, and were regularly subjected to anti-Jewish programs and expulsions. Europe was at that time consumed by religious hatred. If you were Catholic, living in Protestant lands was not a good idea, neither was the reverse. The resulting conflicts bogged Europe down into massive bloodlettings such as the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War that stifled innovation and expansion. While within the Ottoman Empire,
None of this would happen if the Roman Empire was still around. But that's a story for another day.
differing religious groups were tolerated, and this gave the Ottomans an enormous benefit in building and sustaining internal stability, but to also take advantage of external conflict. When the Ottomans, for example, marched on Vienna, they were joined and supported by Hungarian Protestants, who no longer wished to live under Austrian Catholic Habsburg rule. On a side note, there's an Austrian racial slur for Hungarians that developed out of this historic event, Kruzi-Türken, which means cross-carrying Turks. But it would be unwise, as many unfortunate...
Oh! Jeez! Man, that's a little bit brutal right there.
do today, to see this as a glorified, tolerant Islamic past. For one, and probably most importantly, there's a big difference between being tolerated and having rights as a person.
We're going to pause here for a second, because obviously this is a hour and 46-minute long video. So here's the thing. This is going to be part one of the Turkish century, from Hittites to the Atatürk. So there you go. Noticing, obviously, it's quite clear that when you establish an empire, it is important to have an identity and people, but also, hey, don't be a douchebag. Treat people with respect, of course, but it's one thing to go from a nomadic civilization to then to a established civilization. So what can we learn from this? Well, first of all, 10 out of 10, already 35 minutes into this video. Kraut, Kraut, Kraut or Kraut, however you say their name. This video has 3 million views, and as it stands right now, it is a wonderful. This video is when did it come out from? It came out from the wonderful year of, oh goodness gracious, Cretaceous, March 26th of 2020. Hey, nothing of significance or importance happened in 2020. No need to worry about it. We weren't locked down and in our homes. But 3 million views, 3 million plus views already. Folks, we here at Americans Learn encourage all of you to please support the original content creator. We're going to continue on with this video segment, and we are going to go on to part 2. So this is part 1. So as a favor for me, again, please support the original content creator. Was there anything in this video in particular that caught your attention? Is this the kind of content you guys would like us to check out more here on Americans Learn? And let's face it, folks, you, our viewing audience, are the people that give us feedback. Now, I love checking out all this stuff, and I love expanding my mind. And yes, I like to add in my 2 cents. Hail Rome, after all. I have my biases, after all. But let's be clear here. The world isn't just in one perspective. There's many perspectives here. So it's clearly this video is very well informed. There's a lot of information here, and I definitely like the tone and music choices and the animation. So we'll go on with part 2 very soon. And as always, folks, keep your heads on a swivel, and remember, Constantinople will always live on in our hearts. See you for part 2.